right, welcome back to another, and this is a special episode of PR Yourself with Leah Frazier. We're right in the middle of May, or actually we're ending May, Mental Health Awareness Month. So hopefully everyone is just learning and educating themselves as much possible, but also taking that self-care that you need. But I am so excited. And when I say excited, I am just over the moon happy to welcome a very special author of Black Joy. But before I get to speaking a little bit more about the book, I just want to say that I came across this book because of wine. The one thing that gathers people all together. I decided to sign up for the Black Girl Magic Wine Club, and Tracey Michae'l Lewis-Giggetts' book, Black Joy, was our read of the month. And so we got to meet and greet with the author and learn about different wines from the Black Girl Magic collection with the McBride sisters. And so I was obsessed. Soon as I got the book, I connected immediately and I reached out like, I have to have you on my show. I don't care. We'll work around your schedule. And she is here today. So welcome, Tracey, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so grateful to be here.
I just hearing you speak, I literally I put it on my big screen. I was like, okay, this is not a phone or an iPad. I shot it up to my big screen TV, and I had my wine, of course.
I did too.
I know. I was like, that this is a great conversation, and a conversation where you need a little sip or two, you
hmm
know. But I was just so fascinated just by the discussion at hand. I was so encouraged because most of the people that were logged in were Black women from all over the world coming together to have this discussion surrounding Black joy, which we'll talk about what that means to you a little bit later. But before we do, I mean, you're an educator, an author, a writer, you're a mom, you're all the things. And the site says 18 books. Is it more than 18 now that you've
It's
authored?
18. It's 18
18
with, I guess,
with one on the
19
way.
coming out in September, right?
Yes. So talk to me a little bit about your work and your journey, because I'm personally a little bit upset that I'm a little bit late to the Tracey train.
um, well, welcome to the Tracy train. I'm glad to have you, no matter when you jump on. I have been writing. It's interesting because Black Joy came out in February of this year, 2022. And that's 20 years since I put out my first piece of work. So in 2002, I, put together this small poetry collection, and that was my entry point into sort of publishing and writing and putting my work out into the world. And from there, I've put work out independently. I've done, independent press, small presses. I'm a ghostwriter, so a lot of that number are collaborations that I've done with high profile authors. And then there's Black Joy. So it's been a 20-year journey of, freelancing and writing for different people, as well as putting my own work out.
A lot of our listeners are like small business owners, startups, founders, entrepreneurs from all over the world that tune in. And what can you say about that process, the patience, maybe, especially as an author, when you creatively put your all into projects and there's that fear that is anybody going to read it? Is anybody going to buy it? And then some start small, so self-publishing, into desiring to have a larger publisher. So what was that process like for you?
I think oftentimes people think that the writing is the hard part. And for some people that's true. Like I talk about like what does it take for a person to sit down and actually tell their story? And there is a process that people have to go through to get the courage to sit down and tell a story. But I have found, as someone who's been doing this as a business, if you will, um, is that the hardest part is the moment when if you're independently publishing, you get those books in the mail, or if you're with a major publishing house where they say, okay, this is your release date. it's at that point that, and just speaking to Black Joy, like I had a lot of hesitation and trepidation because I told a lot of intimate stories. I was very vulnerable in this
Mhm.
book. And it's like, oh, that transition from independent to mainstream publisher means that more people are going to be reading these very intimate stories. And so there's been some work that I've had to do around work I've had to do around wrestling with um, what I've put out into the world and being okay with the stories that I've told. And then there's just the work of marketing, the work of publicity. If you're an introvert like me, it's challenging, right? Oh, you want me to go on Good Morning America? Like, like what does that even look like? What does
Right.
that even mean? I mean, it's great for my mama. She tells everybody, she pulls it up on
My
her phone.
baby's on TV.
Exactly. Every Target in Louisville, Kentucky has seen my mama's face. Okay. And
Aw.
she's taking pictures with the book and all of that. So, that's wonderful and exciting. But then I think it's like you just said, it's the fear of, or is anybody going to buy the book? How well is it going to do? One of the things I can say now that I'm like 90 days, into this book is that, some books grow week over week. They're not the big pop where everybody runs out. One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get is that Black Joy is selling week over week, right? But most people say, girl, I got to take this in bite-sized doses because it's a lot and it's people are wrestling. And so I had a pivot moment about a month ago where I had to say, what did you write this book for? Did you write the book for the big, you know,
Right.
GMA moment, or did you write it for people to heal, to begin their healing work, to begin their own
Right.
joy journeys? And if you did, then it makes sense that people are taking this slow and they're telling their friends about it, but they're also taking it slow as they're digesting it. And so I've made my peace with that. Um and so yeah, it's challenging, but everything I think for me that's been the most challenging happened after I've already written the book.
Does it create a sort of pressure that the following book within, do you have that pressure that it has to have the same success, or have you kind of just released that and you're just like, whatever it does, it does?
Yeah. The version of myself that still wrestles with seeking external validation
Hmm.
worries about that.
Hmm.
The part of me that is doing my healing work, so to speak, and that's, working through that, has decided that it's okay no matter what. The next book I have coming out is very different from this one, but it's also extremely intimate and personal. And so, I have to understand that it's a different audience and it may be received differently. And that could be that it skyrockets, or it could mean that it's a slow drip. I'm okay either way. But there's somebody, as my therapist says, there's somebody on my bus that's like, girl, the next one got to be amazing, you know. Because everybody's talking about Black Joy and all the feedback and all the reviews have been amazing for Black Joy. So how do you up your game? And but I try to tell her to sit down somewhere. I got this.
Good. Sit on down somewhere. It's gonna be all right.
Hmm.
But what I love hearing too, hearing you say is also, uh, in some ways, maybe you've put self aside for the healing of the collective as a whole. So maybe introverted Tracey's like, I don't want to do all that. When I did this, because it started out as an essay for the Washington Post, which I will link in the caption. It is absolutely phenomenal, and it's also included within the book. So just buy the book. But the long-term goal of it, maybe it wasn't for all of this, right? But then collectively, we all need our healing. So maybe Tracey, the business owner, the entrepreneur, puts self, not necessarily aside, but kind of pulls some of that back for the collective goal, for the collective healing as a whole. So I know a lot of my listeners struggle with this because they don't want to put themselves first for their business. They're like, okay, Leah, I don't want to go on a live, even though I know what I've created will actually help a whole community of people. But I don't want to because I'm introverted, I don't want to go on Instagram live. I don't want to do live streams. What was a conversation or what did you tell yourself where it's like, okay, inner Tracey, we've got work to do?
Mm-hmm. Um, it's interesting you mentioned IG lives because I'm that person. Like, do I have to?
Video, I am very much video off. If we can have
Yes.
video off, I'm going to do it. And if you don't detail it to me, I'm coming video off.
Exactly, exactly. Um, you know what? It's a daily, just like I talk about like daily writing in your joy, being intentional about your joy. I think it's a daily work for me to tell that version of myself, that person, and because at the end of the day, what I'm learning through therapy is that that person is trying to keep me safe, trying to protect my feelings and my heart, and trying to, put up these barriers for me so that I don't, fall victim to some troll on the internet that doesn't like my video or whatever it is, whatever that part of me is fearing, in doing that. And so I think the daily work for me has to do with what is my intention, asking myself what is my intention. And you're right, like if you asked me 5 years ago whether or not I would be writing a book about Black joy, I would be like, for what, like why, like that, and it never occurred to me. And that's kind of how I know I'm supposed to be doing it, because it has unraveled in a way that was way bigger than I could have ever imagined for myself. I was going to write, I've always been a writer, but this kind of happened almost as if the ancestors were like pushing me on. It's like, this is the time for this conversation because of what's happening in the world. So I think part of it is not setting aside, but more of a understanding the interconnectedness of us all, that the work that I'm doing on myself and that I'm writing that about is very much connected to your work, Leah, and the next person's work, and that we're all doing this and we're all having impact in that way. And so I try to look at it as the collective healing is very much wrapped up in my personal healing, and my personal healing is very much wrapped up in the collective healing. And I think if we kind of see each other that way, then we're more apt to do the work, because we understand that there's an old like church thing where people will say someone is in chains waiting for you to
Right.
set them
Right.
free. And I don't know necessarily if that's an exact thing that I want to be thinking about, but I do believe that we're all connected and that my work helps the next person do their work. And so someone's reading Black Joy and is getting the courage infused to be able to tell what may be the next amazing New York Times bestseller book or film or, business or whatever it happens to be.
So let's go back to that because the original essay that you wrote was, I mean, if anybody reads it, you feel like you're right there outside with you and your
Mhm.
daughter, just experiencing joy in its form. It was written June 19th, 2020. So right after everything that happened with George Floyd's murder. So pretty much at the peak of just everything just going on, racially charged within the world. Tell me what pushed you to say, I'm going to move forward with this and I'm going to publish this very personal realization
Mhm.
that has happened for something as high profile as the Washington Post. I know you've written for many
Mhm.
publications already, but why then?
Um, I think it is, as I said, it was a series of just unexpected events. And I talk about this in the book, lost a family member to racial violence in 2018. I had been grieving that, and my daughter had been watching me grieve. And my therapist asked me a very pointed question, like, what does joy feel like in your body, Tracey?
Mm,
And I couldn't answer
mm,
her. I was 40 something years old and I couldn't tell her what joy felt like.
mm,
And that began me paying close attention for the very first time of the somatic natures, the physical nature of how our emotions show up. If she had asked me what does anger feel like, I could write a whole book on that. If she asked me what my sorrow and despair and hopelessness
Yeah.
sometimes felt like, I could have answered that, but I could not answer with joy, and I wanted to know why. And so that was, I think, the latter part of 2019. I'd also come off a very severe health crisis that I, in hindsight, believe was very connected to the grief and the trauma that I was holding in my body. So I had this opportunity to tell this story, and I literally was at a workshop for writers, and the Washington Post editor was there, and me being my introverted self, was terrified. You know, my pitching usually happens via email. Like okay, yeah, I have a story idea. You interested? But I had to verbally pitch this person, and
Oh.
they were like, yes, send it to me. You have it, send it to me. And it ran the very next week. Now, this is post George Floyd, post Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. Like, all of this is happening at this time. Protests are happening everywhere. And so I am, my grief and my rage is all wrapped up into me trying to be intentional about joy and understanding that my joy is a resistance, that it is a defiance, it's a reclamation of my humanity in the face of all that was going on. And from there, like everything, it was a whirlwind. The Washington Post piece kind of took off. My ghostwriting agent sent it to a bunch of agents. You know, one of the agents of my clients, ghost client, was like, does she have anybody representing her work? I know you represent, but like, and she was like, no, I just represent, her ghostwriting work. And like, yeah, we're gonna do that. And I signed with an agent. Within a month and a half, we worked on a proposal. A month and a half later, the book went to auction, and it went to Gallery Books, Simon and Schuster, and it was just like, oh, okay, so this is what we're doing. Okay, God, I got it. But then the work began. Like,
Right.
okay, I gotta write a book on Black joy, and I gotta unearth some stuff in
Mhm.
me and use that, all that stuff that I'm unearthing, to take, as a lens to look at Black folks as a collective, and how we have wielded joy, and how we can use joy to heal, whether or not we ever solve this issue of white supremacy and racism and all the things that we encounter. How do we heal despite that? Because
Mm.
we really, our ancestors gave us, I think, the baton, if you will, of Black joy's resistance, right? Like, as something that's strategic, that we that's the reason why we sing at protests, we dance at protests,
Right.
we are defining it in that way. And they also gave us resilience. Like, we are the bounce back people of the earth, right? We keep coming back. You can kill us, but you can't kill us, that kind of thing. But
Right.
I think we're now in a season where we're exhausted and tired and feeling the weight of generations, and feeling, in some cases, some despair about why things have not changed.
Mm.
At the core, of course, there are more opportunities and more rights, but like, at the core, why there's still this very violent reaction to um, us. And so I think the work now is the restoration. Like, how do we heal in the midst of this? Because that's going to determine the work going forward. And so I guess I just have been rolling with what God has put in front of me, and I am writing what I feel compelled to write. And yes, it hurts sometimes, but that it is also very satisfying to know that I'm getting this stuff out of me with a purpose. It's
Right.
not, it's with intention.
Yeah. And I mean, there's throughout the entire book, it's like a whole collection, and it's organized in different sections. Were any of those written before, or was that all new after they told you, okay, this is green light, and you're like, holy crap, now I've got to write about this and this and that. What did you
Yeah.
already have some ready to go, or?
I, I did. I had about because in the proposal you have to include some work, right? So I had I want to say either 7 or 8 pieces that either had been previously published, like the piece in the Washington Post, the blacker the love was in essence. So there were some that I tweaked, like they were previously published, but I'd also kind of expanded them or worked on them. But still, like there's 36 essays, maybe 7 or 8 of them I brought with me. The rest of them were brand new
Wow.
and they're out, they were written, in 2020 and 2021. Um, and that, I think it was important because of the work that I was doing on myself, deep trauma work in therapy. I could not have written this book without my therapist. I tell her that all the time because I was unearthing things, but I had to have a place to put it,
Yeah.
and I was doing the things, grounding myself, meditation. I was doing all of that work to try to center myself as I was writing, but I needed something to support all the stuff that was coming up and all these things I was remembering, especially with the stuff related to my grandmother and my great grandmother and those stories, which um, were often things I had not thought about until I actually started writing. So,
So it was a therapeutic and healing journey for you throughout,
very much so.
but at least you had therapy to help you sort through it and kind of help you move on, because sometimes we open up things and we don't know how to move past it.
Yes.
And so that
Yes.
can often be a scary feeling as well, like, okay, I just opened up Pandora's box, what am I going to do with this? I gotta work
Oh,
tomorrow.
absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. That I needed to have someone who could walk alongside me so I could make sense of what I was feeling and sensing and learning about myself. Yeah, I think these kinds of books, I think, require that to some extent. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe I required it. But it was definitely helpful, that's for sure.
If someone that is non-black comes
Mhm.
up and they question, maybe just out of curiosity, what exactly black joy means, and I'm sure you've probably had this question since February, and obviously it's hard to put a definition to that. What do you say when, if somebody's like, well, what is this black joy?
Mhm.
How do you define this?
Oh yeah, when that first essay came out, I had a lot of inbox messages and email from folks who wanted to know why I was putting race on joy. Once again, you're playing the race card, that kind of thing. And I think what I've had to explain when I've chosen to explain is joy is a universal human experience, joy by itself. It is physiologically a response to pleasure, right? The dopamine, the adrenaline, all the things that happen when we're really happy, when we're really excited, all of those things that happen in our bodies, that is joy. Um, Black joy, though, is all of that same human stuff that lives within this melanin and the historical and situational and present day context that I have to exist in as a person, as a black person, and so that's distinct. It is unique. Just culturally, it is an experience that is very different from the joy that other groups um, experience. It's also very different in terms of how it's perceived and how it's embraced by other groups, right? So we all know that historically that our joy is frowned upon, right? Like get a bunch of sisters at the restaurant and we're enjoying ourselves, and in many cases that can be frowned upon depending on who's in the room. Our children and their laughter at the park, our ways of moving, our creativity, like all of those things, until it can be commodified and colonized by other groups, is often frowned upon. And so I think black joy is about this joy that lives despite that, in
Yeah.
spite of. And it's something that our ancestors gave us. They've been knowing how to hold joy even when they weren't particularly happy. There is a distinction between the two. when their circumstances weren't particularly happy, there's this undercurrent of joy that was always present and they could always tap into. Um, and so I tell, people who are not Black, that that is what Black joy is. It is not it's not standing in offense against any other person's joy, but it is our celebration that lives within our particular experience. And I often get people who ask me, well, can a white people read Black joy? What can a white person read Black joy? And I'm like, they absolutely can. And this is how
Yeah.
I would ask for them to approach it. I tell this story. I got to tell you this story. Uh, me and my husband and my daughter, we in our former neighborhood, we used to go to this Greek festival. We loved going to this Greek festival. It was amazing. The food, the dancing, like all the things were amazing. And we would go, I think we went like a couple of years in a row. It was amazing. What we did not do when we got there is jump on the stage and try to dance with them. We didn't tell them that maybe they should think about how much honey they're putting in the baklava. I think there's honey in baklava. We didn't give them instruction about what could make their celebration of their culture better. We simply sat in the midst of, in honor, right, of what their lived experience and what they were putting out to us. And so that's what I ask, people who are not Black, please buy the book, please read it, but sit as an observer, right, of and in celebration of this particular cultural experience. And then maybe there may be some things that you can wrestle with yourself in terms of how you may have perceived Black joy in the past. So that's my
I love
that's
that.
that's
And
my
please
submission.
don't make great value Juneteenth ice cream either. I just have to put that
That part.
out there. We don't
That
need you to
part.
tell us what flavors of ice cream we should be eating on Juneteenth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just have to be petty on that
Not
one.
mad at that at all.
So what I love about the book and are like these little different variations of joy, and of course the storytelling is just magnificent. But I think when we talked about it before we went live, one of the chapters that resonated the most with me, especially as a meditation teacher, was the chapter on breathe again, a
Mm-hmm.
manifesto. And I often have a lot of Black women that come to my classes that they'll say, I feel like I'm just holding my breath all week. And it's trapped, and it's normally trapped from here to here. If I ask them to breathe deep, they don't know how to do it. I had a girl just past Sunday, we did a sound bath, and we get people breathing before we go forward with the sound meditation. And afterwards, she came up to me afterwards and she said, Leah, I cried the entire time because it was the first time I can say that I felt myself breathing and breathing deeply. And all I could do was just give her a hug.
Mm.
So this is not a foreign story, and it's not a foreign experience. And I love that just something as simple as breathing and the breath is something that we can relate to and find joy from. So my question for you, Tracey, you talked about it in the book, but what was that first time where the light bulb clicked for you and you said, wait a minute, just this simple thing of breathing, I don't even really know what that feels like. What was the catalyst that sparked that for you?
There, whew, there's I'm tearing up now just listening to you because I know that story. I feel like I had shallow breathing for close to 40 years. I don't think, and I think the breath was complicated. Breathing deeply was complicated for me because I have a background of trauma. And my particular trauma, there were moments where I needed to not be seen and not make a person aware, pretend to be asleep. And so I learned it was embedded in me that to take shallow breaths. And
Mm-hmm.
I think some version of myself, as I always say, held on to that for so long. And I would say right around the same time that I'm beginning to do therapy and unpack some of that trauma and deal with my grief, I was asked to breathe deeply, and I couldn't. It
Mm,
terrified me.
mm,
To breathe, to take a deep breath, I felt out of control and unsafe. And so part of my work was realizing that the deep breath was actually going to ground me, and that breathing was actually okay. Deep breathing was okay. And that it was part of the healing process. Like there were all of these things that I had to embrace before I could even bring myself to breathe deeply. And so then I began to do meditation work. I started studying contemplation and those kinds of things. I'd say that's only within maybe the last 8 or 9 years that I had that moment of I can't shallow breathe my way through the rest of my life, and that I
mhm,
need to take these deep breaths. But I had to overcome the terror. And I thought it was just me. I had this whole conversation with someone, and they're like, no, like many people struggle with deep breathing because of what it conjures up in them.
mm.
And the feelings of insecurity and not being safe are very real for a lot of people. Also, I had a moment where, and I write about this in the book, with an acupuncturist, where I really got a like wide-eyed awakening to what the mind, body, spirit connection. I went to an acupuncturist to deal with pain. I'd been going, so I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of the needles or anything like that. And she hit in my, I guess, collarbone or clavicle, whatever this is right here. She hit the needle, and I wailed.
Mm,
I bawled. And I didn't
mm,
know, it was kind of funny because I didn't know why I was crying, but all of this emotion came out of my body,
mm,
as the result of that one pressure point, and on
mm.
my I guess shoulder. And so I was like, oh, right. So this thing is real. Like there's a connection between my mind and my
Yeah,
body and my spirit, and oh, okay. And so that I think was a turning point for me to say, okay, let me be intentional about my breathing. And I don't know, I kind of connected it to the very thing that has been stolen from us as a people.
yes.
There's something about that mantra of I can't breathe. I
Mm,
can't breathe. Um, that we've seen in these videos. We've seen that talk of, choking our breath. And I don't want to get too woo woo woo,
yeah,
but I feel like there's a connection between my breath and all the breaths that have been taken,
yeah.
my grandmother and my great grandmother and my great grandmother. And I am, again, deep breathing is something that I do to stabilize myself now. But 7 or 8 years ago, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It just triggered me so poorly. And that was a rant. So I don't even know if I answered your
No,
question.
no, I think it's perfect. And I think you saying kind of like how our breath is connected maybe to our ancestors, and and I almost find joy in knowing that this discovery, maybe they're dancing saying, yes,
Yes.
yes, that you've discovered this. There's this amazing book. I guess all the great authors are named Tracy. Tracy Stanley has a book called Radiant Rest, and I use it for yoga nidra all the time. Yes, so and in the beginning, she talks about how even as a people, we don't even know what it means to rest
Right.
because we were always so worked up in slavery. And it's just been passed down generationally that we don't even give ourselves permission just to be calm and relax. We didn't have that privilege. And so I think when we find that capability, to your point, to breathe and to rest, our spirit guides and our ancestors are definitely dancing with joy because for some, that wasn't a luxury that they were able to afford. And if they did, they found it in those little pockets of Black joy, like you've written about. So it is all interconnected. And I just love that you're just putting that out for everybody, you know, to realize and experience. It's magical.
Yeah, and
Well,
I think some of us feel guilty with when we do have joy, right?
yes.
And I want people to know, we think, oh, how can I experience this wonderful moment or have this joy moment when my ancestors didn't have the opportunity, or they had to work so hard, so I should work every myself to the bone also. And I feel like our ancestors was like, no, I did it, you don't have to. you
Right.
know
Right.
so yeah, I definitely, I'm with you on that.
Tracey, I literally could talk to you all day. I have a million other questions, but I know you're busy. But we've had a lot going on in the world. We talked about it before we went live. The shootings that happened in Buffalo, for people that look like they could easily have been my grandmother, my grandfather. And that was just really sad for me. And then recently with Uvalde and the elementary school shooting, is just it's a lot going on in the world. For someone that looks to your book, or maybe even looks to other areas for healing, what would your suggestion be for self-care and just preservation of our body, minds, and spirits as these actions continually it happens? It's just cyclical. It just keeps cycling.
Yeah, I encourage us all. I use the language of intentionality all the time, because the level of grief and rage and sorrow that you know has shown up. I speak for myself in my own body as a result of all of this. Um, Means that we actually have to be intentional, conscious, defiantly so, in creating moments of joy for ourselves. So yes, do all the things as in that you identify as self-care for yourself, whether that is sleep or massages or whatever that looks like. It happens to, quiet time, stillness, whatever it is. And also, write in your joy for the day. So when you're making your to-do list, decide what joy is going to look like for you in that day. My daughter is a great example of this. When we have our mommy daughter days, she makes a list of all the things that she wants to do, and they're all joy things. And she still has to do her chores. She still has to do, homework and all that kind of things. But those are givens. And so she doesn't have to write that down in her mind. She has to write her joy in, because those are the things that are priority for her. And I'm like, oh, wow, that makes sense. Me, I'm writing down, okay, I got to do this call, I got to do the podcast, I got 500 words I have to write, all of that. Why not write in the joy? And in these moments when, despair is like creeping up on us and hopelessness is creeping up, and we're angry and we feel like it's never ending, because we literally went less than a week before we had another awful mass shooting. We have to decide, and we have to decide to be intentional about our joy. And also, it does not, I think sometimes people think joy has to be some big elaborate thing, right? Like, ooh, a trip to Cabo with the girls. you know for me, it's turning on Beyonce in my car and singing at the top of my lungs, or like, because she's good for an anthem, right? So like,
Yes.
if it's singing at the top of my lungs in that moment to get some of that stuff out of me, then that's what it is. And that's my joy for the day. And I might cry and rage for the rest of the day, but that moment I'm going to sing Girls Run the World until I can't anymore. And it could be something as seemingly as small as that, right? Or maybe it's taking a walk, or maybe it's, 5 minutes of just being still. Whatever it looks like, write it in your day. And we need that. You need that. It's fuel for the work ahead, whatever that work might be for you. And so that's what I hope. That's what I hope people take from the book. I hope people identify what joy feels like in their body, so they can call it up when the world's a mess, as it is want to be.
Yeah. So glad that you mentioned that. And I hope that every single person listening takes your advice, but also shameless plug, buy the book. And you'll find yourself in some of those stories too. But before we wrap, Tracey, tell people about this next book, which I'm going to humble brag. I saw that you posted it on Instagram. So great job with your social media. And
I'm
I went
getting there.
ahead. As soon as I saw it, I said, oh, I'm pre-ordering. I pre-ordered the minute I saw it. And then I came back and I let Tracey know, got my book. I'm not going to
I
be late
love
to the
it.
party. So tell me a little bit about this latest one.
Yeah, this book is Then They Came for Mine, Healing from the Trauma of Racial Violence. Um, it's seems totally, on time for what we're
Mm-hmm.
going through. But it is part of the grief work that I'd had to do with unpacking the loss of my elder cousin to racial violence in a grocery. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the work that came out of that, it's particularly addressed to those who identify as Christian or in the church, and all the ways in which these thoughts and prayers and nothing else,
Mm. Ooh, Tracy,
doesn't work.
you'll have to get with the team on this one. It's
So
got to
yeah,
be lit.
it is gonna be lit. I kind of go hard there. I always say I'm writing to Black folks and at white folks.
Mm,
So I'm hoping that whoever's reading this particular book will connect to my humanity and the real grief work I had to do around that, but also the challenges, the hardcore challenges that I make to the church, to white folks, and to Black folks, but in the way of healing for us. Like, how do
mm.
we heal? So it's still along the same lines of like, what do we need to heal as a people? But it goes a little harder, I think. So
Ooh, y'all ain't ready for this. All right, Tracy. Well, you get your rest now, because when that comes out, it's gonna whoop, it's gonna pop. It's gonna pop. I
I,
feel it.
I receive it.
But that's what's needed to get these conversations going. No more hiding behind things, saying it in these small circles, which that's fine for some, but it needs to be put out there. So I'm so excited about this one.
Whew, thank you so much. September 13th, that's the drop date.
All right. Mine's already pre-ordered. I will put a link in the caption for everybody. Tracey, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today. You have no idea how much I appreciate you. I
Mm.
appreciate you. I appreciate you. Please continue doing the work that you're doing. If you ever need anything, please, 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 please reach out. Seriously.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for who you are and the work that you do.
Thank you.
For us introverts,
Yes. Oh my gosh. That have to push ourselves.
exactly. Thank you so much for all that you do and for having me here to talk. I love it and I appreciate it so much.
Well, I honor you, and we can't wait to see you in Dallas. I'm just putting it on out there.
Put it on out there.
All right, Tracey, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
All right, bye.